Good morning. You're listening to AM Ocala Live, WOCA, The Source, 96.3 FM, 1370 AM. Moving right along with our show. Busy day today this Tuesday as we're making it work. We just finished up with Matt Gibbs, Sunrise Automotive, as good stuff there about your extended warranties and what to think about it now and the idea, justification of actually getting one. Now moving on here a little bit as we're going to take a look at something that's a little bit even in my arena here, as we're going to talk with, we're going to be joining Laurie Keefer, as we have her on the phone, PhD psychologist with Mount Sinai's Hospital of IBD Center in New York City, who specializes in psychosocial care in patients with chronic digestive diseases, most notably Crohn's disease and ulcerative colitis. And Allison, who is living with ulcerative colitis, to discuss the connection between that and emotional well-being. And with me as the host, not only do you have Allison, who's got the ulcerative colitis, but you're talking to a host that actually has Crohn's disease, diagnosed at 16 years old.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Wow.
You're a crony.
That's right. That's right. So with that being said, here to talk a little bit about, Doctor, the idea of the psychology, the emotional well-being that goes along with some of these digestive issues.
Yeah, so, I think that one of the things that we really set out to do in the UC narrative survey, which I'm talking about on behalf of Pfizer today, is that, the brain and the gut cannot be disentangled. Mental health and physical health cannot be disentangled. And when we surveyed more than 2,000 adults with UC globally, 84% of those patients agreed that their UC was mentally exhausting. And that had nothing to do really with whether or not they were in, so-called remission, meaning they could not be having all the physical symptoms that are also debilitating and embarrassing, but that even when people are feeling otherwise physically well, mental exhaustion really became a huge quality of life issue in the patient population survey.
Now, with that being said, in that idea, and I think I kind of understand a little bit of this. Like I said, having Crohn's disease myself, is get after that a little bit, because we've always heard, at least I have, that a lot of this is stress related. It adds to the infliction, to the inflammation, if you will. And in what way is all of these anxieties tied to that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So obviously I tell my patients all the time, stress doesn't help anything. People with inflammatory bowel diseases really need to be more proactive than the average citizen because of that, right? The stress can be really a trigger for GI symptoms, even in patients that don't have GI conditions, but particularly in patients that do. And so not taking care of your emotional health can really exacerbate your disease in the same way that not feeling well physically, having urgent diarrhea, having bloody diarrhea, having abdominal cramping and exhaustion can lead to depression and anxiety. Depression, anxiety, embarrassment, low energy can also further make the impact of your disease worse. So it's really cyclical.
It's interesting because, yes, having somebody who's been through quite a bit here myself, it's this idea that you wake up a day, it seems to be that you have some issues. And just to start with, I've been in remission now for well over, just about 20 years now. I had 2 feet 2 inches in my small bowel removed. I had it in my small intestine, which I was fortunate enough to have that opportunity to have that surgery be done. But see, here's the thing, is like you wake up where a day that the day before you felt normal, you wake up the next day, you're having issues, and then from that you're thinking, how's my day going to go? Now, do I have to call off work and stay home? And if you think, if I call off work, what's my coworkers going to think if I'm calling off another day? What is it going to mean when I need to make that paycheck and have those hours added to it? What's that going to mean when it comes to what tomorrow will bring? What's the rest of the week going to look like? If I don't make that payment, how's rent going to look like? What's the rest of the... So it builds and it builds.
Absolutely.
And if I had to break it down, I think my next question is if you could break it down to the idea of eating and nutrition as opposed to like we're talking with the emotional well-being. How much would you say percentage-wise for dealing with digestive issues is nutrition-based and mentally based?
Oh, that's a really tough question. I think that there's probably phenotypes of patients, right? So some people are much more stress sensitive. They're much more likely to be a gut responder when stress is going on. Other people may be less that, but they're super sensitive to foods and nutrition, and they have to be really conscious about what they're eating. But, part of our holistic care should really be all of those things, right? It should be the physical symptoms, whatever medications and surgeries, but also making sure that patients have ideal nutrition to manage the mental symptoms, right? Because nutrition is not just about your diarrhea. It's also about your mood and your sense of confidence. And so, I would say 50-50 if, I had to split those two. But certainly those are really critical pieces of care.
Gotcha. Now, with you, you have Allison here, who's been living with ulcerative colitis, and with having her on is to also discuss a little bit about her journey with the idea of the emotional well-being.
Well, yeah, and I'm excited to have a fellow IBDer to be able to share your perspectives as well. So it sounds like our journeys have been a little similar. So there's a lot of shared experience, which I think is something that I got out of this survey. The idea that in the UC narrative survey that I wasn't just the only person experiencing this mental exhaustion.
Sure.
For me, it was obvious that these physical symptoms were causing exhaustion. But for me, kind of what you talked about, finding myself trying to manage the impacts on my family, on relationships, trying to date, see my friends, my career. How do I manage, continuing to hold down a job and my finances, and this kind of spiraling mental exhaustion. And I found myself being very isolated, and even not wanting to share some of the experiences because this diagnosis was new to me.
Sure.
I didn't know how to share some of these really embarrassing symptoms. You being diagnosed at 16, I'm sure can relate. And it wasn't until I was really able to share about what was going on with me that I was able to get the support that I needed from my friends and family, as well as from my healthcare providers. They would look at me and say, well, you look like you're doing fine. And I'd have to say, well, I'm not. And here's what I'm feeling, and here's what's going on with me. But it definitely took me some time in my journey with this disease to find my voice to be able to speak up.
Sure.
It was really debilitating at first. And I did not have that voice at first, and I didn't know what I was supposed to ask. So, using those resources that we have available to us that I now know of that give you those guides to ask about what questions to ask, how to approach discussions, what are important things to ask. Finding those tips on, like talkinguc.com and the Crohn's Colitis Foundation website. Those resources were really helpful and helped me feel a lot less alone.
Absolutely. And I think it's kind of interesting because now I'm on the opposite side. When I do go in to see a doctor, it's like, well, how are you doing? It's like, I'm doing fairly well. Or like, well, no, but what's wrong? So it's like on the opposite now, because that's what it was like in the beginning. It's like, no, I'm doing great. I holistically take my vitamins like I need, that I know I'm deficient from my malnutrition at certain times. And and with that too, I just want to, as we just got a little bit of time left, is the idea of everything that goes into the emotional well-being. I think that's an important aspect of it, because I think anybody facing any type of disease or anything that affects them on a day-to-day basis, that could, it's the emotional anxiety that actually, I think, no matter what disease you could have, could lead into that in some way, to say, if you can take care of that first, if you can be mentally tough and strong, that adds a lot of positive stuff in your favor. And I think at the end of the day, too, it comes down to the idea of taking a look at the emotional well-being, because we know so much, too, now with the idea of prescription medication. And when I was diagnosed, Crohn's disease was something very rare. And it's interesting. It's interesting now that I can watch the History Channel and I see 3 advertisements for 3 different prescriptions of Crohn's disease medication, which is, I don't know how I feel about that overall, but nonetheless, I think it is very important for anybody who's listening that may be having anything that they feel ill, and especially in a time now when we talk about COVID-19 and all the other stuff that goes along with just trying to stay healthy. Your emotional well-being is one of the biggest factors in keeping you healthy.
Absolutely.
Yeah, 100%. And we say, like patients, and even when you were diagnosed many years ago, we used to think that patients should just settle for some of those emotional symptoms because, poor them, they had these physical diseases. And so if they were depressed, if they were anxious, well, it was because they had Crohn's, it's because they had UC. And that's no longer the paradigm, right? Like, you should be able to thrive, not just survive your condition. And I think this really points to that.
Exactly. Now, where can folks go for a little bit more information there, Doctor?
So I would recommend the talkinguc.com website. Certainly, the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation would also be really great. But the results of the Pfizer UC narrative survey would be on that Talking UC website. So I think that can sometimes be really validating to see the data and see that people are really not alone in this.
Excellent. Well, thank you very much for your time. That's Dr. Laurie Keefer, PhD, psychologist with Mount. Did I say that right? Sinai?
Yes.
Sinai.
Mount Sinai. Yeah.
Absolutely. And to Allison, who
actually, Crohn's was discovered there.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, thank you guys very, very much. We appreciate it, and you guys have a great rest of the week.
It was a pleasure. You too.
You got it. WOCA Ocala. Take our short little break. We'll be back right after this. More show to come.